Last week, as I was preparing to fly back from Columbus, I got onto the plane late in the boarding process, and on Southwest Airlines there's open seating, and when you're late in that process it usually means that most of the aisles and windows are taken up. I prefer the back of the plane anyway, so as I got on I was kind of craning around to see what was available in the back, and as I happened almost not quite to the middle of the plane, there was an empty aisle seat. Normally I would pass that by, hoping that there was more like a whole row in the back, but in this, the other two seats were like a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old, meaning they did not take up a lot of space, and so this looked like a perfect seat. As I sat down, I found out that these two sitting in front of us were their aunt and uncle and a small child. Across the aisle from them were these two's parents and another small child. Behind them was Grandpa and two little boys. Behind them was Grandma and two little girls. Behind us were another aunt and uncle, another little kid, and a baby. Now, if you've flown, you know that I just sat down in the perfect opportunity for total chaos for the next several hours. Baby could be crying, kids could be getting up and down, there could be sick, all kinds of things could go wrong. And as we were beginning to taxi, Grandpa reached out to the woman in front of me that was either a daughter or a daughter-in-law and touched her on the shoulder and said, "How are you doing?" Which told me that either she just gets anxious and maybe sick and just doesn't enjoy flying in general, or she was afraid. And the reality is with flying, so many things can go wrong in the journey that it's understandable that you would have some anxiety or fear as you go. It all starts the moment you walk into the airport. You never know how long that line is going to be and what it's going to take to get through the check-in line, and then you get to security, and you never know what that's going to be like because there's always people that have too big of things, or that when I flew out the other day, I accidentally got in a line where I was behind 10 wheelchairs, and each one of them took 5 minutes for them to get through so you never know, right? Then once you get through security, you're going to go sit down at the gate, and if there's enough seats at the gate, you can sit down, and hopefully the bathroom isn't all the way down at the other end of the place, because you want to do that right before you get on the plane. And then the plane can be delayed, and it can be delayed because of maintenance, it can be delayed because of weather, it can be delayed because they have computer problems, and so all of this happens, and you haven't even gotten onto the plane yet. And then you get onto the plane, and you never know who you're going to be sitting next to. It could be the guy that spends 3 hours telling you that your college degree is a waste of time and money. That was a fun one. It could be the person who takes their shoe off and puts their sweaty sock foot up on the bulkhead in front of you. It could be the screaming baby or the whole family with all sorts of things going on. And all of that assumes that the plane flight is completely smooth. You can hit turbulence, enough to make you sick, enough to spill drinks, enough to terrify you. It just depends on how much turbulence it is. You can get to a point where you're just flying around in circles for whatever reason, that you're in a holding pattern, that they can't land the plane, and you're checking your watch because you know you might miss your connection. And that's all of this stuff assumes that everything is safe. But there is those rare occasions when there are crises and where there are crashes and all the rest of that that can even lead to death. So every time you book an airplane ticket, it's no wonder that you might get on that plane and have your father-in-law reach up and say, "Are you doing okay?" Because there is a lot of things that can go wrong. It's easy to be afraid. As we hear this gospel text today, Jesus starts off by saying, "Do not be afraid." Jesus says that a lot. He says, "Do not be afraid." He gives a reason, because it's the Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. So we start off here on a great note. He then goes on to talk about putting your treasures places, and that's where your heart will be. And then he gives us these two metaphors about being alert. The first one, he says, pay attention, get dressed, have the lamps ready to go, because when the master comes back, you want to be ready. He's going to come back from the wedding banquet. He's going to knock on the door, open it up, sit you down, feed you, and serve you. So the master is going to come back and serve the slaves. Then he says, remember, if the owner had known the thief was coming, it would not have let the house be broken into. Now I find these two different metaphors curious, because to me, they say different things. If you're waiting for the master to come back and serve you and bring you a banquet and a feast and be the one that feeds you when you're the slave, that sounds like something that would be pretty exciting. And so that to me is a level of alertness and a level of excitement that you're paying attention to, because you want that thing to happen and you want to be ready for it. Now on the other side, if you're waiting for the thief, that is a different kind of expectation. That is a more fearful, anxious expectation, not something you want to happen. I wonder if Jesus was just simply talking about alertness, and he gives two different examples of it, but I'm struggling with them because there is a difference between looking forward to something and that sort of waiting, and being afraid and that sort of waiting. Now, I don't think we've done it on purpose, but as human beings, I think we have heard that second part of it about the thief and taken this metaphor extremely literally and said, yes, we have to watch out for the thief. And an airplane flight is the perfect metaphor for all of the things that we can fear in life. Just as we have to get in line and wait and we never know how long that's going to be, there are things we have to wait for in life. We have to wait for test results. We have to wait for the people that we need to call us back. We have to wait sometimes for relationships to heal. And that waiting can be anxious. And when we don't know what the results are going to be or how it's going to turn out, we can even be fearful in those places. Once we get into the airport, we have to go through security. And security is a real concern, like literal security in our lives. And so we have alarms, and we have guards, and we have passwords, and we have insurance, and all these things that we hope will keep us safe. And some of those things are good common sense things that we ought to have. And when you think about on a plane, you get set next to people you maybe don't want to sit next to. We don't always get to choose our neighbors. We don't always get to choose who we get to interact with out in public. And so when you go, every time you go out the door, you never know what you're going to encounter. And it's easy to be anxious and afraid as we go, to lock the doors and lock the car and carry mace with us and all the rest of that, because you just don't know. And then just as the plane can circle around and be in a holding pattern, we can find ourselves living in holding patterns where nothing seems to be moving and we seem to be stuck. And we think we're going to be there forever, and we think we're going to miss our connections, and we're going to miss that next thing, and that can make us anxious. And that's not to mention all of the things that can really go wrong with our health or with the people we love, with the crises that come along in our lives. And we all are going to get to death someday. And all of that, just like a plane flight, can lead to this place of anxiety and this place of fear, where we can spend a lot of time being worried about what is to come and how we can avoid those things and protect ourselves from them. Now, in the early part of this text, Jesus says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. I think for a long time we have heard that and understood it to mean we should put our treasure where our hearts are. And this is, you see this all the time. Whenever there's some kind of tragedy in our world, people go, oh, that's really sad. And then we invest in that. We make donations to that. And if you think about the way that you live, there are many times where you want to put your energy and put your time and put your money in places that you care about. But that's not what Jesus says happens. He doesn't say, where your heart is, that's where your treasure goes. He says, where your treasure is, that's where your heart will be. What he's saying is, where you put your money and your time and your energy is where your focus and your heart will be. And if you think about that, the places that you have invested a lot of time and energy and money, don't you care about those places and want to see them thrive, or if they're people, see them do well? And when you take all of that and lay it up against the fearfulness and anxiety that we can find in life, it is easy to see how we can put our time, our energy, and our money into fear. We can invest in fear. We can invest our money in systems and alarms and passwords and all sorts of things to protect us. We can invest our time in trying to make sure that bad things don't happen. We can invest our energy in looking around us and making sure we got an eye out for the thief that is coming. And that thief might be a literal burglar thief. That thief might be an illness. That thief might be a person that we know just robs us of our joy. Whatever that thief is, we can invest a lot of time in trying to protect ourselves from those things. And what happens when you invest in fear? If that's where you put all of your treasure, you end up reaping that in your heart, being filled with anxiety and fear. If you invest in fear, that is what you get. Now Jesus, in these two metaphors, gives us this one about the thief, but the other one is about a master that's coming back to serve and feed. It sounds like something you ought to expect to look forward to. And so I think what Jesus is doing is inviting us not to invest in fear, but to invest in hope, to invest in expectation, to invest in a sense of wonder that the master will come back and feed us. The master will come back and serve us. But there's a trick with all of this, and you hear it in the other texts we heard this morning. Abram and Sarah Sarai became Abraham and Sarah. They were given this promise of a baby. And when it didn't come, they got impatient. The promise that came seemed like it was delayed, and so they started to think that the promise wasn't going to be fulfilled. You hear it in the other text we heard about faith, is in the things that we cannot see. And so as we live today, we hear these promises of God that Jesus will come again, that the Son of Man will come again and feed us and serve us, that we need to be alert for that. And if we think of that as this one-time, end-of-times thing, it really does seem far off. And that promise that seems like it has not yet been kept is a promise that's hard to believe in sometimes. And if that promise seems too far off, it's easy then to fall into that place of fear and anxiety, because that promise isn't here yet. But what if Jesus' is coming back isn't just a one-time thing? Maybe there will be that thing at the end where Jesus comes and just sweeps everybody up. But we are post-Easter people. What if the whole point is that we're supposed to be looking for Jesus all the time? Looking for Jesus out in the world, investing our time, investing our energy, investing our resources in where we might just see Jesus at work already feeding and serving people. We might just find that in investing in that, we get to reap joy and wonder as we go. As we got off the plane last week, I got kind of caught up in that whole family as they were stopping to get the strollers that were coming up, and there was little kids all around, and Grandpa started to push them all out of the way and said, "You go on ahead and you can get away from us." It was an acknowledgement from him that it might have been a little bit taxing to sit amongst all of them. Because the little baby did cry all the way down. The little one behind me kept reaching through and poking me, none of which did I mind, because the very first experience I had with them as we began to taxi and take off was the two little girls behind me who had never flown before. Aunt up here is anxious, but these little two were so excited. And you could just see them straining to look out the window because Grandma was sitting on the window. And when the plane finally took off, the squeals that came out of them were amazing. And one of them just shrieked, "We are flying!" And yes, we are. It's amazing. We are flying. We are human beings with no wings, and we are flying. And the two of them were so excited. And it was a reminder for me what it looks like to go out into the world with a sense of awe of what it is that God can do among us. And a sense of wonder that Jesus has gifted us with in this idea of being alert. The Son of Man coming to serve us and feed us ought not to be something we're afraid of. The thief, maybe, but the Son of Man, no. We ought to have a sense of wonder and excitement. And the whole experience that we have had with God in the world ought to be that way. Jesus coming as a baby, that's amazing. That God would come into the world as one of us. The things he did when he walked around in the world, amazing. That God would die on the cross as like the ultimate act of power is amazing. The resurrection is amazing. We ought to have a sense of wonder every day when we get up that Jesus comes to serve us and fire us up to be God's people. And in that way, then, we can go out into the world and look for the amazing things God is doing. Sometimes it's hard to see. The Olympics started this week, and I heard that there was a team of refugees, 10 of them, who literally live in refugee camps. That the UN went out and had them race and said, "You all are pretty fast. You should be in the Olympics. There's a swimmer." That, to me, is amazing. That the Olympics, which so often have this corrupt stuff when they're trying to pick cities, and there's doping scandals and all this other stuff that goes along with the Olympics, that amidst all of that, there are people who are countryless and homeless, who have lost everything in their lives and haven't seen their families, are coming to this place with hope. Hope not just that they can run the race, but hope that they can give hope and vision to all the other refugees in the world that are living what they live through. To me, that is amazing. That is God at work, and it ought to give us a great sense of wonder that stuff like that happens. But it's not just that big stuff. It's the little stuff. It's every time we come to this table to be fed and served by Jesus. It's every time you carry out one of those little kits to take to homeless people, that you might experience that little interaction of giving them something to eat and serving them in some little way. Every little action like that we have in our lives is amazing. It's a wonder that God continues to come and work through us, that Jesus is already here to serve us and feed us. I'm reminded of the passage that Jesus talks about let the little children come to me and do not hinder them because the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. I was reminded last week that it belongs to the little ones because they still have that sense of wonder. May we be blessed to learn from them, to go out into this world looking to see Jesus, so that each and every day we may sit back like those little girls and say, "We are flying." Amen.